This is the Alden Report.
Today's episode is brought to you by FrontRowBenefits.com, connecting consumers and businesses with front row access to the greatest health insurance that the United States has to offer. Visit FrontRowBenefits.com. Folks, listen, if you're like me, if you own a business, if you have a family, or if you're an individual and you're looking for front row access to healthcare, maybe you're tired of your premiums going up. Maybe you don't want to pay those high deductibles anymore. Maybe you're tired of paying more and more for your monthly prescriptions, and you want to make sure that you're getting that VIP access, that front row access, then visit FrontRowBenefits.com and get a free quote. They're connecting consumers and businesses with the top level insurance carriers in the United States at discounted prices. Visit FrontRowBenefits.com. That's FrontRowBenefits.com.
This is the Alden Report.
All right. Well, my name is Mike Alden. We are here in Blue Bay Studios. And I tell you, I am super, super inspired. You know, here we are in 2022. The world is still upside down and people are, dealing with all sorts of challenges daily, both in their personal and professional life. And I wanted to talk a little bit about something that I'm seeing more and more of an aversion towards, and that is risk. I talked about this in my last podcast, where people want more. They want more stuff. They want more freedom. They want more money. They want better relationships, but they're not doing the things necessary in order to get the things that they want. And one of the things that I didn't cover in that last podcast is risk. You see, if you want certain things, not only do you have to take action and actually have to do things, but many times you have to take risk. The old saying, risk versus reward. The more risk you take, the more reward you get. That's a true thing. But so many of us, we run away from risk. We're afraid of risk. And why is that? Why are we afraid of risk? What's the problem? Well, there's a lot of different challenges with risk. As you get older, and you see this within the financial world, as you get older, the financial risks become mitigated. They become less riskier, right? So if you're looking at your stock portfolio or your 401k, you're going to be, taking less risks as you get older. Why? Well, you want to make sure that that nest egg, that thing that you've been working so hard for, is there when you decide you're going to retire or when you need it. I mean, it makes sense, right? It makes sense. When you think about risk at an earlier age, in your 20s, your 30s, and even in your early 40s, it's easier to take risk. I've taken risks throughout my life that, a lot of people would be really, really, really afraid to do. And why? What's the fear? Well, there's a couple different things that cause that fear. One, it's the fear of losing, right? So when you take a risk, you could potentially lose. When you take a risk, you could potentially lose. And I get that. Nobody likes to lose. But you need to take that risk in order to get to where you need to go. Now, the thing about risk is that you will lose. You're going to lose. In fact, you may even lose more than you're going to win. And that's almost a guarantee. It's almost a guarantee. The more risk you take, the more you're going to lose. And so what do you do about that? You want more out of life. You want to be more successful. You want your family to be in a better position financially. You want your kids to have things that maybe you didn't have, but you also don't want to lose what you already have, right? I get that. So there are ways to minimize risk and ways for you to move forward. I have my one of my first books right here, Ask More, Get More. And in that book, in this book, I talk about how to minimize risk. And it's a very similar kind of principle when people talk about luck. They say the harder I work, the luckier I get. Well, one of the ways to minimize risk, especially as a lawyer, I always think about risk and how to mitigate that risk and minimize the chances of losing. And if I do lose, I try to minimize the amount that I'll lose or how big I'm going to lose. And one of the easiest ways to alleviate that fear of risk is by preparation. So whatever it is you decide that you're going into, any sort of business or a relationship or whatever it may be, you put in the necessary work and the preparation that you need in order to, one, succeed, but two, minimize the risk altogether. See, a lot of us like to roll the dice, so to speak, and hope for the best. I don't know. I hear this all the time. Hope. Oh, I have hope. At least there's hope. When people say at least I have hope, they're usually kind of on their last, the last leg, so to speak. They're in a bad spot. Oh, at least I have hope, or at least there's hope. I hear that, you do hear that, with medical conditions. And of course, if you have a medical challenge that doesn't look good, of course you want to cling on to hope, because maybe it's already beyond, mitigation. And a lot of times, a lot of medical ailments that people have are a direct result of how they live their lives. Nobody wants to talk about that, especially if you're in a scenario where it's potentially fatal. I get that. But as it relates to relationships or business, right? One of the greatest ways to be successful is, one, to take risk, but two, you take calculated risk. You take a calculated risk by preparing. Okay. So what do I mean by that? Like preparation. What are we talking about? There is an element of risk in every part of your life. You hear it all the time. Oh, I could just walk outside today and be hit by a bus. True. Absolutely true. Right. You could enter into a business transaction and lose whatever money that you might put into that. You could enter into a relationship and lose the most valuable asset that all of us have, which is time. You might find out that over time, that person isn't a good fit for you. But you'll never know if you don't try. And you'll never know how successful you'll be if you don't at least put in that work, that preparation. So let's take a relationship for a second, okay? So let's say, you're out there, you're in the dating game, and, you're on all the apps and Bumble and Tinder and Match and eHarmony, and I don't know, there's so many of them out there. And you, trying to find a soulmate, right? You're trying to find somebody to share your life with. You're trying to find somebody to have a relationship with, okay? Well, these apps, a lot of them, they actually help you with the risk, right? What do? They match you up based off of based off of the things that you like, based off of the things that they like, and vice versa. Now, that's not perfect, but they do a very good job of trying to minimize the risk involved in the relationship, right? So in those apps, you really don't have to do much because they do a lot for you. But if you have certain questions that aren't answered as a result of these apps, well, what should you do? Well, you get the questions answered. You ask the questions. Everything always seems to come back to asking. This book was 2014, man. It all seems to come back to asking. Ask the tough questions. Ask the questions that you don't even want the answer to. In The Tipping Point with Malcolm Gladwell, I've told this story before, but I'm going to give a condensed version of it. But there's a great story in there about an artifact that was discovered, and everybody wanted it to be real. But there was something in the back of a couple guys' minds and gals' minds that, it might not be real. This artifact might be fake, but they didn't ask the questions because they didn't want the answer. because they knew that if they got the right answer, it would be the answer that ultimately would let them know that it wasn't real. But they didn't ask because they were so caught up in the idea of this artifact of being real, and they wanted it to be real. Like in relationships, you want the relationship to be perfect. You want that person to be your soulmate, but there's something inside that's telling you that they're not, and you don't ask the questions early. Now look, people get into relationships and you put in all the work and it doesn't work out, right? Put in all the work, your years. Look, I was married 10 years. It didn't work out. It was a risk that was involved on her part and my part, right? We both took risks. And ultimately, it didn't work out the way that either one of us wanted it to work out. But there were also rewards and things like that, right? My daughter is a result of the risk that both of us took to get married, right? So when you think about relationships, and you think again about these apps, because there's a lot of them out there, they're taking away a lot of the risk for you. So if you did nothing else, you're going into a relationship now versus 20 years ago with a lot less risk, believe it or not, a lot less risk, because they ask all the questions that you feed them, right? So you need to be honest with yourself as well. When you decide you're going to enter into the dating game, you need to be honest with the profile, because if you're not, then it becomes riskier for you, becomes more of a riskier transaction by getting paired up with somebody who might have a certain personality trait that you're just not into, or they might be into certain things that you're not into, but for the purposes of dating, for the purposes of you trying to find that soulmate, you're not honest with yourself and you're not honest with the other person, because you're so caught up in the dream or the hope that we talked about earlier of it just working out. And that's one of the biggest challenges with risk, is we're just not honest with ourselves. We're not honest with the other party because we don't want the answer, because we know deep down inside that the answer is not what we're looking for. So if you knew that the answer to the question that you may have, the one that ultimately is the crux of the matter, the one that really is the linchpin to the entire relationship, if you knew the answer was not what you wanted, then you wouldn't even move forward. But because you want it to work so much, you neglect to ask the question to minimize your risk and theirs as well. So what I'm saying to you, especially as it relates to relationships, and this applies to business as well, is ask the tough questions, the ones that you might not want the answer to. Because if you do, you're going to minimize your risk, and you may cut out all risk altogether, because you may find out that it's just not going to work out. And therefore, you never even enter into the transaction or to the relationship because you got the answer. So one of the greatest ways to minimize risk is to ask the questions that you don't want the answers to. Okay. So again, first book, Ask More, Get More. We talk a little bit about that in Ask More, Get More. And by the way, I'm probably going to be updating this book maybe this year. So I'm excited about that idea. I've been thinking it through for a while, and we might just do that. Hey, listen. So if you're listening right now, and up until this point, if you're enjoying what you're listening to or you're watching, and this makes sense for you, maybe this is something that a friend or a family member could benefit from. I'd ask that you share it, you like it, you comment, rate it, whether you're listening to it on iTunes or Spotify or Facebook, or you're watching it on YouTube, or all the different platforms that we're on. I'd ask that you rate it, you comment, you like it, you share it, give us those 5 stars. If you feel as though that you're benefiting from it. We've been at this for a long time. I've talked about this in a lot of my books, and I saw a quote years ago from an insurance company of all companies. It said the biggest risk is not taking one. See, many of us, we don't even take that risk because we are crippled with fear of loss. We don't even take the risk because we're crippled with fear of loss. You minimize your risk by asking questions. So again, you minimize your risk by asking questions, but so many of us don't even move forward because we are so crippled by the fear of loss. And how you minimize the fear of loss is by asking those questions. But you also need to be willing to lose, because nothing is bulletproof. Nothing is bulletproof. You can put forth your best efforts. You can ask all the right questions. You can do all the right things based off of what the books tell you or even what past experiences tell you. And ultimately, you can still lose. Ultimately, you can still lose. And that sucks. No other way to talk about it. You do all the right things and you still lose. And as someone who has taken risks over and over and over in my life, and more specifically in business, I wrote an article for Boston Man magazine and also my blog, and it was titled, "I'm a Great Loser." And my mom actually said something to me, "Mike, why are you saying that? Why are you calling yourself a loser?" I'm not calling myself a loser. I'm just better at handling the consequences of the loss as a result of the risk that I took. And it doesn't make it feel any better, but I do know that when I enter into a business deal or, a relationship, it doesn't have to be a relationship as far as like a partner. It could just be a friendship too. You lose in those types of relationships as well. You invest time in those relationships as well, and you lose. Risky. Think about risk. You hear this all the time. I hear, things like, "Oh, well, that's competitive. Things are competitive." Well, everything is competitive, and everything is risk. Your life is risk. You know why? Because ultimately, no matter what you do, you're going to die. And as I approach my own birthday, about the halfway mark of my life, I begin to think more and more about the risks that I've taken, and also about the risks that I may take. And, as time goes on, as we get older, it does become a little bit harder at taking those risks. Why? Well, because you have more on the line. A lot of us have families, financial obligations, kids in college, kids on their way to college, mortgages, car payments, all these things. And if you lose, you suffer a much bigger loss, right? Suffer a much bigger loss. But here's one way to mitigate that as well. If you're at a stage in your life where you're risk averse because of the way you've lived your life and because of where you're at in life. If you can do this, I just did this. One of the greatest ways to minimize risk, and one of the greatest ways to be prepared to take risks at a stage in your life where you normally wouldn't, is to remove as many liabilities as possible from your life, including your mortgage, your house, your car payment. If there is a way for you to sell your home, if there is a way for you to sell your car, if there's a way for you to remove any other debt from your life by paying it down, if you can, and you want to take a risk, but you want to minimize that risk, well, you reduce your liabilities as best you can. And when I talk about reducing liabilities, I'm not necessarily even talking about the financial things. One of your biggest liabilities may be who you surround yourself with, and that could be your spouse. I mean, that's a tough pill to swallow. One of the biggest liabilities in your life could be your spouse. But when you think about life and how fragile life is and how quickly time flies, are you really going to sit back and just let it happen? Or are you willing to take the risk in terminating that relationship so that you can grow further in your life, so that you can be happier in your life? And it's a tough pill to swallow. Like I said, it's a tough decision to make. But if you make it, you'll find that it most likely was the right answer. It was the right decision. And I implore people to look at that. If you have kids, if you have a mortgage, if you're married, if you're in a long-term relationship, and that relationship is really the thing that's holding you back, think about how to remove yourself from that relationship. You can minimize risk there as well. There's plenty of ways to minimize the risk there as well. You know, if you're married, you're talking alimony, child support, things like that. There are ways to minimize that risk as well. You just need to prepare for it, think it through, maybe talk to someone who really knows what they're doing, to maybe talk to someone who has been through it before. Obviously, you can speak to attorneys. But if you're at a stage in your life, male, female, husband, wife, doesn't matter, you're not happy, you're taking more risk than is necessary as you continue to stay in that relationship. It's one of the riskiest things you've probably ever done. Why? Because you're risking your own life because you're fearful of what society may look at when you get divorced or when you leave that relationship. You're fearful for what your kids may think about. You're fearful for maybe the repercussions from your spouse. But if you know that you shouldn't be there, then you shouldn't be there. It's really that simple. It's simple to say, but it's really hard to do. And I've done that in my own personal life. When I knew my marriage was effectively over, I got help in making the decision, and my marriage just ended for, like many marriages, for a bunch of different reasons. And it didn't feel good. But I also knew that staying in the marriage was riskier than leaving the marriage. And a lot of people out there are in this exact same situation, and they're afraid. They're afraid financially. They're afraid emotionally. They're afraid of what society may think of them. You cut out that stuff, caring about what other people think, and you prepare for it mentally, financially, physically, that risk becomes a lot less risky when you make that decision. I've talked about this before in my books, and there was a study that was conducted with octogenarians, and they asked them a whole host of questions. But one of the questions was about risk. And there was a common theme throughout the answers to the question. And basically, what it was that these people in their 80s weren't upset about the risks that they took and failed. They were upset about the risks that they failed to take. And that, to me, is the riskiest thing you can do. When you look back on your life and you say, man, I think I could have done that. I think I could have pulled that off. But you'll never know. back to that insurance company, that insurance quote, the biggest risk is not taking one. You don't want to live your life. You don't want to get to a point in your life where you said, you know what? I should have taken that job. Maybe I should have given that relationship a try. Maybe I should have, stepped out and done the things that I've always said I wanted to do. You know how many times I hear people telling me the things that they're going to do or that they should have done or that they might do? My response is always, well, go ahead and do it. That's simple. Go, oh, well, I can't. Well, I can't do it because of this, because of that, because, well, ultimately you're afraid of risk. And as humans, our biology is afraid of risk. We're trying to survive. I wrote about this in a recent blog, again, on Boston Man Magazine, and also on my website, mikealden.com. And, I talked about, risk, obviously, but I also talked about survival versus thriving. And I would much rather thrive. I've been surviving most of my life. People say, oh, you're a survivor. You're a survivor. Yeah, I'm a survivor. But being a survivor is not a good thing. We're designed to survive. And many of us survive through life by not taking any risk. And you get to the end of your life and you look back, just like these octogenarians, and say, man, the risks that I failed to take is really the failure in and of itself. The risks that I failed to take is really a failure in and of itself. So remember that, is wherever you are in life, in the stage in life, that we're all faced with risks every single day. And the biggest risk is life itself. Why? Because you're going to die at some point. So why not take some risks in life and try and do the things that make you happy and do the things that you want to do in life? Why not do that? Why not take those risks? How do we mitigate it? Well, you prepare. You think about what's necessary in order to move forward. You do the things that you need to do in order to minimize that risk. And the last thing I want to talk about briefly is that when you do take these risks and you're not successful, I just used the term failure a few minutes ago. I use the term failure because when you're talking about getting into your 80s, it pretty much is fatal, right? But when you take these calculated risks and you do prepare and you ask all the right questions and you take the risk, you take the leap, and you're wrong, or it just doesn't work out the way that you thought it was going to work out. I talk a lot about preparing for the worst case scenario. If you can mentally wrap your head around the fact that the risk that you may take might not work out, not having a negative mentality, but being realistic and understanding that it's possible that it might not work out, and that whatever the outcome, good or bad, that you're happy with the decision that you made. You're happy with the decision that you made. Again, because the biggest risk is not taking one. Again, this is Mike Alden. We are here in Blue Vase Studios. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I've been inspired to do more of these straight to the mic. Again, if you've enjoyed this episode, if you felt as though that has added value, please go ahead and like it. Please make sure you're subscribed, whether you're on iTunes or Stitcher or YouTube or wherever you're listening to this, Facebook or Amazon, wherever you're listening to this. Please make sure you do subscribe. Please make sure that you do like it. Please make sure that you do share it. And also give me a 5-star rating. We've been at this for a long time. I really enjoy doing it. I really enjoy the comments. It feeds me. It feeds my soul and makes me happy. So again, if you can do that for me, I would really, really appreciate it. Again, my name is Mike Alden, and we'll see you soon. Today's episode is brought to you by FrontRowBenefits.com, connecting consumers and businesses with front row access to the greatest health insurance that the United States has to offer. Visit FrontRowBenefits.com. Folks, listen, if you're like me, if you own a business, if you have a family, or if you're an individual and you're looking for front row access to healthcare, maybe you're tired of your premiums going up. Maybe you don't want to pay those high deductibles anymore. Maybe you're tired of paying more and more for your monthly prescriptions, and you want to make sure that you're getting that VIP access, that front row access, then visit FrontRowBenefits.com and get a free quote. They're connecting consumers and businesses with the top level insurance carriers in the United States at discounted prices. Visit FrontRowBenefits.com. That's FrontRowBenefits.com.